Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear, and I meant to go on a hike today, but I woke up too late, got really hot, and so that just didn't happen. So some of the gear videos that I was going to shoot today, I'm going to be shooting tomorrow, and I was thinking about what I could shoot from home today. I prefer to do shoots outdoors as much as possible, but a video that I've been meaning to make that I think I'll achieve a better result if I'm sitting here where I can just think a little bit freely and have all of my knives next to me. I've got my whole knife case here. Something that got asked of me recently and kind of gets brought up every now and then as like a broad question that's really difficult to answer is, what do I look for in a knife? Or what do I appreciate most in a knife? And so obviously, if you've been watching my channel at all, you know that I have quite an array of knives. I certainly have a lot of certain things, like I've got a lot of Spydercos, but a lot of my Spydercos are pretty different from one another. I've got knives that some would consider budget pieces. I've got knives that others would consider grails or very expensive. It's all relative. So my most expensive knife is like a $600 knife, and that's about the most I've ever spent on a knife. That being said, some people spend thousands or tens of thousands of dollars on knives, so it really is kind of a weird sliding scale. But my point is that I have a pretty wide variety, at least from where I sit. I look at it as a variety within my knife collection, and so I've been thinking for the last couple of days about how I would kind of put my thoughts out there about what I appreciate most in a knife. It's a really, really difficult question to answer. So I'll actually kind of make this an open tag, and I'll see if some of my friends who also have YouTube channels want to tackle this question as well and try to put into words what things they appreciate most in a folding knife. So I'm going to do it for folding knives specifically, and one quick asterisk as well. The kind of catalyst for me actually finally doing this video, even though it's something I kind of had on my mind for a while, is I did a review on a knife relatively recently that was mostly positive, but had a few negative aspects to it, and it's a knife I ended up letting go of afterwards. And the company behind that knife and the designer behind that knife were both super cool, and DM'd me on Instagram and wanted to talk to me about it and get more of an understanding of what I would have liked to see that's different. So I don't think that my opinion is all that matters in the knife world, and they probably shouldn't design a knife just based solely on what I would like. I'd like to think a knife, if I was in total control of all the elements of it, would sell really well, but I'm not naive enough to think that I'm the expert on all things knives for everybody and everyone's hands, and knives can be somewhat personal. But I did want to thank both Alliance Designs and Ian from CMF Metalworks, because both individually talked to me after my review of that Alliance Designs CMF Conquest, which I was clear in the video, I think, was a very nice knife, and there were a ton of things I really liked about it. It was just the pocket clip that killed me. So it was cool that they were willing to talk about that. They were by no means upset. They actually welcomed the conversation, which I thought was very cool. So kudos to them for being that kind of company. But yeah, so I've spent a couple of days thinking about it. And by the way, this is going to be kind of a rambling, long, mostly talking. I'll hold some knives, I'm sure, while I do this, but mostly talking video. So if you're not looking forward to me jabbering on, skip this one. It's not for you. Anyways, the last couple of days I've been thinking a lot about it, and I think the best way that I can formulate the things that are most important to me about a knife are to use the list of things that I would kind of grade a knife on if I'm putting two knives head to head. Like, for example, not too long ago, I did a video of the Shaman versus the PM2, and I graded it on a few categories, and I've done that for a couple of things. I did the Spidey Chef versus the Waypoint. I did the Olympic Wayfarer versus the Sabenza. It's not the type of video I do a ton, but I do think certain knives deserve to kind of be pitted up against each other, at least the way that I view them, and so it's fun for me to kind of suss out which I think wins. So I ripped off part of one of the pages I did when I was preparing for one of those videos, and just to make sure I didn't forget any of these. So the criteria that I judge a knife on in a head-to-head like that is looks, action, ergos, fit and finish, value, carry, and cutting. So seven different categories. And I don't necessarily think one is more important than the others. I think some hold more weight than others do, but let's kind of go one by one about my thought process. And hopefully this video is valuable for those of you who are watching who want to understand what my preferences are in knives, so that you can know if there's a certain thing about knives that's really important to you that I don't care so much about, then as you watch my reviews of knives, you'll know if I say something about that, you can give however much gravity to it you want based on understanding my preferences. Because if to you looks are the most important thing, but to me function is the most important thing, then if I say a knife looks great and it's really cool looking in person, but functionally it doesn't work that great, then you won't care because you don't care about function as much as I do. So even if I might not keep that knife because it doesn't function the way I want to, you as somebody who's buying the knife for the looks might like it, and so on. There's all kinds of ways we can play out that scenario. But for that reason, I hope this is valuable. And I think this is good timing with my channel still being somewhat young. Obviously, my tastes may change over time, but one of my favorite things about watching YouTube reviewers a lot who review knives, especially like the tabletop reviewers, I like seeing enough of their videos to get kind of a pulse on what they appreciate about knives, because then it helps me to understand if I'm using their videos as a shopping tool, what to kind of filter out, because I know already that compared to Nick Shabazz, ergos are different from me, or compared to Slicey Dicey, I like more exotic materials and he likes more plain things, or like there's certain ways that I can kind of filter their videos for my own information when I understand their tastes better. So that's a long intro, so let's just jump in. So the first category is looks. When I talk about looks, I mean the aesthetics of a knife, and this is a great opportunity for this category, because I think the Olamic Wayfarer with a sheep's cliff blade is one of the most attractive knives that I own or have owned. I love the aesthetics of this knife. Let's see, what else do I think is just really cool looking? My Koenig Arius nails it in the looks department, in my opinion. This design may be a little bit out there for some people, although there are much more wild versions of the Arius. This is actually a pretty plain Jane one, but the lines of this knife, the shaping of it, the design choice is how I would define the looks of a knife. So for me, looks are certainly not the most important aspect of a knife, but me being somebody who has a lot of knives, looks aren't unimportant. Especially, I love posting my knives on Instagram. I really enjoy the Instagram community. So crappy looking knives don't look as good for the Instagram feed. Take that for whatever it is. You can think I'm an a-hole for saying that out loud, but I like knives that have some flair and look appealing. I think knives are a tool, right? We can all agree about that. I use my knives to cut things all the time, but knives are also my hobby. They're also what I do for fun. And so not every knife has to only be functional, especially when you own as many knives as I do, and as I imagine a lot of you who watch this channel do. So if you're buying a knife that's your 15th knife, or your 20th knife, or your 100th knife, then the more you have, it's almost like the less functional they need to be. That being said, we'll get to actual like philosophy of use and all that, but I do think it's important that knives are good at cutting. They're a cutting tool. They can be good at cutting in different ways, like my Spyderco Tough is super thick behind the edge. That knife is ground like an axe. It's basically like a chopping tool. It's not a slicing tool. Whereas other knives, which are very thin behind the edge and have thin blade stock and are more dainty compared to the Tough, this is like an excellent slicing knife. So there are different types of uses, and that should be factored in as well. But I guess that's a long way to say that I think looks should definitely be counted for what I appreciate in a knife, because if I think a knife is really ugly, I'm less likely to own it, and if I do get it, even if it does work well, I'm less likely to keep it long term, because it's not going to excite me, and knives need to excite me at this point in my life. Otherwise, they're just not going to stay in the collection, because there's too many other knives that I already own that excite me and that I want that will probably be exciting if I do get them. So Looks are important. The next one, action, is really big for me. It might not be for you at all, and I respect that. But for me, bear in mind when you watch my knife reviews that action is very, very important to me. Let's do a quick demonstration. The best action that I own on a knife is my Koenig Arius. It is drop shutty, it runs on bearings, I can spidey flick it, I can use the flipper tab, the way it closes, the way it opens, everything about deployment and closing this blade is absolutely enjoyable for me. I like to play with this knife for hours on end when I'm sitting on the couch, watching movies, working on my laptop, whatever it is. I like to be using this knife in a not cutting sense, but in a like fidget spinner sense. Like this is literally, it can be as much of a toy for me as it is a cutting tool. Now, that being said, I cut with this and use it like crazy as well. So fidgetability is not the only thing that makes a good action. I should say that as well. But to me, fidgetability can make an action good. As long as the knife locks up secure and is solid and reliable on deployment, if it's fun to fidget with, it 100% scores higher in my book than a knife that also locks up reliably and deploys reliably, but isn't fun to fidget with. Like, the reason why I never owned a nice backlock until right now is because to me, backlocks just aren't fun to fidget with. And there's a review coming soon on this guy, but spoiler alert, I would not call this knife fun to fidget with. Even after owning it, it's starting to break in a little bit. Is it a nice sensation to feel its kind of like really poppy, strong lockup? Sure, but fidgeting with this knife, no, I'm not. I'm opening and closing it. It doesn't feel fidgety to me like a compression lock does. Like, this is way more fun for me to play with and deploy. So action, both of these knives lock up very solid. In terms of functionality, they're both going to hold the blade in the open and closed position. That's what it should do. But this one is just not a fun, fidgety knife, and that's okay. But I give more points to knives that are fun to fidget with. So keep that in mind. Some of the things that I think make an action the most enjoyable would be, one, the method of deployment. I've got stickers and t-shirts, and I say all the time, holes are greater than studs. I prefer holes to studs. Studs are fine. I don't have anything against studs. It's kind of like, this is going to be funny for those of you who disagree, but it's kind of like S35VN in my book. S35VN is a good steel. I'll never really complain about S35VN, like in terms of its actual abilities. It's a great steel. Thumb studs are a great deployment option, but do I prefer other methods? What I would call 20CV being a thumb hole? Yes, or this one 10V, it's hard to call it 20CV, but yeah, I think holes are more fun than studs. I also think flipper tabs are more fun than thumb studs, but I do find that when I have too many knives with flipper tabs, I start to get rid of knives with flipper tabs. I like having a variety in my collection. So even though I have preference on the method of deployment, it's really kind of more about how well they nail that method of deployment. My quiet carry waypoint, which is on the way back to me right now, so it's not here, that knife has thumb studs, and it is one of the best thumb stud deploying knives that I own or have owned. It's just fantastic to deploy with the thumb studs. This one's actually not bad either. But will I take the best knife with thumb studs over the worst knife with a hole for deployment? Of course. Like, the good action isn't just the method, it's how well they're able to dial it in. So I don't know how concise that is, but action to me is probably more important than a lot of people. If you're the kind of guy who thinks the Sebenza is the best knife in the world and you enjoy that action, then we disagree on action. I don't like the Sebenza action. I don't favor the glassy, hydraulic, but difficult to move the whole way along type of action. That doesn't excite me. Is it functional? Yes. Can I use it? Sure. But do I have as much fun with it and do I enjoy it as much? No. So I do give more points to actions that I deem to be fun. And even this knife, which I'm loving so far, I'm really glad that I got this and I'm owning it. The action is the last thing that I like about it. So keep that in mind. If we differ in opinion, that's fine, but that's my opinion on action. So the next thing, ergos. Ergos, I would say, are probably, if not the top thing on my list, they're right up there. A knife should feel good in my hand if it's a knife that I plan to use. And that's a big if, right? Because sometimes I buy knives that are just for fun. And if knives are just for fun and I don't really plan on like daily carrying it, like maybe I'll put it in my pocket once a week just to like switch it up and have something really fun and exciting and different in my pocket, then I can forgive things on knives like that. But even then, if the knife is uncomfortable for me, then I don't want it. There's like a line drawn there. If a knife is just like meh on the ergos for me, but it's exciting enough in other categories, then I'll carry it and I'll get over it because there's other stuff that wins me over. But if a knife is like painful in my hand or just doesn't fit me in a way that's like I'm able to use it effectively, then I'm not going to carry that knife. Because at the end of the day, if I'm going to put a knife in my pocket, even if it's something that I don't want to beat up on and cut with, which I'm being way better about lately. I don't have anything in my collection right now that I won't use. Even my Arius I'm using hard and enjoying. But even if, say I have a $2,000 full dress, really nice custom knife in my pocket, even if I'm unwilling to use that, I'm just excited about carrying it. If I get into a situation where I actually need a knife, not just where it would be nice to have a knife, but where I need a knife, I need to be able to use that knife. So if I'm buying an art piece knife, then it's not something that's going to go in my pocket, and then the ergos wouldn't matter. But I don't buy knives like that. There's nothing for me in a knife that just sits in my closet. Some people love to collect knives that way, and then it's a totally different conversation for them. But for me, ergos have to at least work for me. All aspects of this, actually, I should say, have to at least work for me. They don't have to be the most comfortable. They don't have to be a dream in my hand. It doesn't have to feel molten and rounded and shaped incredibly well. It can be just okay, and that can be fine as long as I like more things about the knife. So ergos, I would say, are very top tier important, because if they don't work, then it's a hard out. Then it's like, then I'm done, and I will not own that knife. Whereas things like looks or action, if everything else about a knife is shining other than the looks or other than the action, isolated on their own, then I could still very well own and carry and use that knife. For example, this knife crushes it on everything other than the action, in my opinion. The action isn't the worst I've ever used. It's very nice for a backlock, but I still just don't like backlocks, and that's fine. Other people who do will hopefully, in my opinion, find that they like everything about this knife, because I think everything else is phenomenal. But yeah, on ergos, if the ergos are just bad, then it's a hard pass for me. Next would be fit and finish, and I think fit and finish is almost a conversation. This is gonna, I don't know how much sense this will make, but to me, fit and finish is almost synonymous with value because there are really crappy, like, budget knives that have terrible fit and finish. And there's also budget knives that have pretty good fit and finish. But a budget knife that costs $50, I'm gonna have different expectations of fit and finish compared to a knife that costs $150 or $300 or $500. So fit and finish is kind of a moving target. And sometimes things punch way above their weight, and they have fit and finish that's just phenomenal for the amount of money they cost. But other times, if I'm gonna have a knife that's like $50 and I'm talking about how good the fit and finish is, usually that's good for a $50 knife. It doesn't mean that it's as nice of fit and finish and tolerances as my Koenig Arius. It's a moving target there. So fit and finish, I would say, is very important for the money that you pay. So it's one of those things that I can forgive a little bit if a knife doesn't cost very much. Once a knife costs a lot of money, then I'll be hypercritical of fit and finish. But under a certain amount, it kind of is what it is, because sometimes to get knives down to a low budget, I don't want to call it cutting corners, but there's processes that are done on more expensive knives that aren't done on those lower cost knives, and that's why they cost less. So that one, yeah, I hope that makes sense, but that one's not that complicated to me, and it's not something that like I feel I can really put into words as like, this is what I look for in fit and finish. Like, I think it kind of speaks for itself as to what fit and finish really is. Like, are there gaps on the material? Is the blade off center and you can't get it centered? Is there pieces that fall off of the knife? Like, are there quality issues with the knife, I guess is what that really boils down to. The next category is value. So to me, value is actually really important. I spend more on knives than some. I spend a lot less than others. So to me, if you've watched like my how to buy, sell, and trade knives, like the conversation I had about that, and I've probably made comments in other videos as well, the way that I'm able to experience a lot of knives is to buy, sell, and trade strategically with the knives that I do have. So my collection tends to evolve over time. A year ago, there was probably less than half of what is actually in my knife case now. A lot of things move around. So to me, since I'm on a relatively finite budget, and oftentimes I have to sacrifice knives that I already have to get knives that I want, the value is very important to me. I can't just throw money on at a knife that I don't think is worth the money it costs with a clear conscience. So I don't mean to like pick on any brands, but I think a good example, someone was just asking me in my DMs yesterday about a certain model from Medford Knives. I've never owned a Medford, so I don't want to speak on the quality. I don't want to dump on the company because I've heard mostly very good things about them. They're made in the US. There's a lot of great things about Medford Knife and Tool. I think that's what they call them. And some of their models are somewhat alluring to me, although some of them aren't. But at the end of the day, I've never bought a Medford because to me, the amount that they cost has never really been worth it from what I can perceive of the materials that they're using, the specs and dimensions of their knives. If their knives cost a lot less, I can pretty definitively say I would have tried a Medford at this point. Now, does that mean I think Medford has to lower their prices? No, I think they just serve a different audience than me, who has a different budget than I do. And that's fine. That's totally cool. But my point is that my budget has to be pretty value focused. Do I break that rule a lot of the time? Yeah. Someone who's on a budget doesn't buy a $600 Koenig Arius. Like, that's just, I mean, you have to be into this hobby or have a ton of money to be willing to buy a knife like this. But for me, like, my sweet spot of knives that I really like and I feel like I get a lot of quality out of is usually at or below $300. And so you'll probably see a lot of knives around that price point on this channel, because that's where I feel I'm able to squeeze value and get really, really nice pieces. So that could change over time as well. If I make it big somehow and have tons of money to throw at knives, then great, I'll spend more on knives, and that would be great to be able to let go of the value category a little bit. But at the moment, value is important to me. The next one is carry. Now this one is really important. It kind of goes with ergos. Like I expressed, I don't own knives that I won't carry. It's just not where I'm at in knife collecting and life in general. If I'm going to buy a knife at this stage in time, I'm going to buy it because I intend to put it in my pocket and carry it for an entire day regularly and often and use it, cut things with it. I want to enjoy it for what it was built to do. So the way that a knife goes into my pocket is very, very important. For me, the way I prefer to carry and the way that I'm comfortable carrying might be different than it is for you. Like for me, earlier today, I was carrying my Wayfarer as my primary, in my front right pocket next to my wallet, and in my back left pocket, I was carrying the Native 5 S90V carbon fiber. I like carrying 2 knives. That's my preference. Both of these knives carry well. They have clips that function. They sit in pocket well. The Native 5 as a secondary is kind of a big secondary for me. Sometimes they're a little smaller than that. Well, it's not that massive either. But there are a lot of factors for what make a knife carry well. Number 1, the pocket clip. Part of why things didn't go so well. In fact, the only reason why things didn't go so well with that CMF Alliance Designs knife was the pocket clip. It was sharp on the corners, it was sharp on the tip, it was okay at retention and like its actual functional, like going on to my pants and holding the knife in there was okay, but the pocket clip was really uncomfortable. Other than that, like the profile of that knife was great, the weight of that knife was great, so it was really only the pocket clip that ruined that. But those other things are important too. Like if I have a knife with a fantastic pocket clip, but it's just super thick and bulky in pocket, or it's too long in pocket and it like bottoms out and more knife sticks out and the clip doesn't even get all the way onto my pants because it doesn't have enough room, like I'm not gonna carry that either. If it's too heavy, that's gonna be a problem. I'm more forgiving of heavier knives lately than I used to be, but still, if a knife is like 10, 11, 12 ounces for no good reason, just because it's like a slab of knife, then that's more than I'm comfortably going to want to carry in my pocket. The knife I have that carries the absolute best, in my opinion, is the Bug Out. Super cheap, super simple. I shouldn't say super cheap. For some people, $100 or 120, whatever these go for, is a lot to spend on a knife, and I respect that. I don't mean to sound like I'm above anybody's budget of how they buy knives, but compared to the other knives that I own, this is an inexpensive option. And why I love it so much isn't because the blade is better than my other knives. It's not better at cutting, although it's very good at cutting. It's not because it has the coolest blade steel, and that tickles my fancy. It's not because it looks the coolest, although I think it looks fine. It's because when I put this in my pocket, it's easy to forget that it's there because it's so slim, so lightweight, under 2 ounces, and it's got a great deep carry clip with an awesome profile, and every dimension of this knife makes it fantastic to carry. So, do I expect knives to be as good to carry as the Bug Out? No, not even close. Like, the other day I was carrying my Spyderco Subvert, which I'm about to do my full review on, and this knife is gigantic. The thickness of this compared to a Bug Out, I mean, are you kidding me? It's like, it's not even fair. But the way that the Subvert is able to almost like trick you in pocket is impressive to me because the clip works well, it slides in and out of pocket well, it feels a little smaller than I would have thought it would have for its size. Sure, it's heavy, but it could certainly be a lot heavier if they didn't mill out those internals a little bit. And I mean, it's passable in the pocket. Is this even close to like a comfortable lightweight EDC? No. Am I gonna wear this in lightweight shorts? No, not even close. Like, but that's okay because it's good enough in pocket. So the way a knife carries, as long as it's kind of like ergos, as long as it's passable, if the knife does enough for me in other ways, then I'll still carry it. A great example also would be my Arius. This is my favorite knife. If that's not clear by now, let me say it again. Favorite knife. I love the Arius. This pocket clip is not the best pocket clip I own. It's just not. I prefer deep carry clips. Milled titanium clips don't really scratch an itch for me. I think aesthetically they look fine, but I'd prefer functionality to aesthetics specifically for a pocket clip. But yeah, it leaves a fair bit of knife sticking out of your pocket. And really thick pants, it can be a little bit difficult to get it past, although I don't have any pants that this knife won't go into. But yeah, this is not, the pocket clip is not a shining feature on this knife, but it becomes 100% passable for me because the pocket clip isn't a hot spot in my hand. It's not sharp on my pocket. it works reliably, and everything else about this knife makes me bananas. I love this knife. So if a pocket clip is at least passable and everything else is good, then I can be on board. I can be fine with that. So yeah, carry, the way I judge it: pocket clip, weight of the knife, dimensions of the knife, and I guess that's pretty much it. Yeah, I don't know how else you would really judge carry, but carry is very important to me. It's one of the top ones. And then lastly, probably what should be the most important thing, but because I have so many knives, sometimes isn't, is cutting, their actual ability to cut through material. Now, let me say as well, I'm somebody who has different needs out of a knife. That sounded funny to say. I'm somebody who has different needs from my knives than a lot of other people probably do, or different expectations out of my knives. A couple years ago, when I was working a desk job, my knives did different things day to day than they do right now. Right now, my lifestyle allows me to go hiking several times a week. It allows me to get outdoors even more than that. It allows me to be doing projects at home, and I'm home all day. We're on quarantine. I'm just here doing stuff, or I'm up in the mountains doing stuff. And so the clothes that I'm wearing, I'm not in slacks. I'm not like dressed fancy at all. I'm in jeans or like chinos or shorts, and I'm in comfortable clothes to carry whatever I want at all times. So the way that I pick a knife for its cutting ability might depend on what I'm doing that day. I brought up the Spyderco Tough already. If I'm going hiking and I'm wearing thick pants anyways, and I'm not worried about weight because I'm not going a super long distance or whatever, and I want to go out in the woods and just chop on stuff for fun, then that knife is the choice. It's a great knife for chopping. Same thing with like my Fox Pelican, although this carries better than the Tough does, and this is definitely ground way better to actually be used as an EDC. I don't want to say this is ground like an axe like that Spyderco Tough is. This is actually a fantastic knife for cutting in general, but I typically, if I was working that office job, wouldn't carry this. It wouldn't make sense in that application, and I have knives that are much slicier for sure. If I was working that office job, the TRM Neutron might be plenty of knife for anything that I would encounter in that office environment, and it would be excellent for it. And I love the TRM Neutron, but because I have a different lifestyle than others do and different activities that I engage in, cutting can mean a variety of things, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So to me, cutting is absolutely important, but that doesn't mean that it has to be a super laser thin behind the edge, like slicing through phone book pages, slicey blade. Do I love that? Absolutely. And do I appreciate that? 100%. But do I also appreciate like overbuilt, beefy, kind of thick behind the edge, like robust, rugged knives lately? Yeah, I appreciate that as well. So cutting can mean different things for different people. And yeah, so if you're watching my videos, you might also realize I don't like do specifications on knives. I'm not like, oh, according to the spec sheet or according to my scale that I have here with me and my calipers or whatever you call them, I'm not like giving you measurements of exact weights and thickness at the spine and thickness behind the edge, and I'm not testing in scientific ways where I'm telling you how many feet it'll go through cardboard or twisted sisal rope, or there's other channels that are doing that kind of thing. The way that I like to use and experience knives is by using and experiencing my knives the way that I want to use and experience them. That was a weird way to say that, but I think that kind of really is what I mean. Like, the way that I want to experience the Fox Pelican is to get out in the mountains with it and chop stuff with it. And I can tell you, as I'm doing that, after I've done that, exactly how well it does. And I can show you how well it does. And that doesn't mean that I have to give you the spec sheet on this, because that's available online and you can read about it elsewhere. And if that's what's important to you, then that information exists already. So if you want that info, I'm not the guy to ask. I'm not the guy whose videos you should be watching. But yeah, I do think it's a little bit funny. Sometimes I get comments or DMs on Instagram from people who are like, what are the exact specs on that knife? I genuinely don't know most of the time. When I'm researching a knife to buy it, I'll look at that stuff, sure. And then as soon as I have it, all of it becomes irrelevant, because what's relevant then is how it does in my hand, how it feels, how it actually works in use. And does it matter to me if this blade is 3.3 inches or 3.7 inches or 3.9 inches? I don't know. I'm not going to put a ruler on it to tell you either, because I don't care. What I know is, for my application, the way that I like to use this knife, it works awesome. It's fantastic at it. So you go look at the specs, because if you're the one researching it to buy it, then you're the one who that matters to. I don't mean for that to sound insensitive or pretentious, or I'm never mad when people ask me questions, genuinely. But that's not something important to me. So keep that in mind if you're watching my reviews. That's not the way that I am trying to define these knives that I'm explaining to you guys. I'm trying to define it by the experience that I'm having with them. So yeah, I don't know how concise that was. Probably not at all. I warned you in the beginning, I think, that it was going to be a lot of rambling. And if you're still watching at this point, you're awesome. I appreciate you. But yeah, let's just say those are the ways that I appreciate knives. Looks are important, but they're not the end all be all. Do I judge knives based on looks? All the time. Absolutely. We're buying these things because they're cool. Let's not beat around the bush about that. Cool factor. Looks has a ton to do with it. Action, I probably appreciate more than a lot of other people do. If you watch my twirly swirly knife trick hand video or follow me on Instagram, you'll see that I like to play with my knives. That's part of how I enjoy them. If you don't, so be it. But don't be mad at me, because I do enjoy knives that way. I also think it's funny, sometimes it's happened at least once or twice, where I'll post a video of me like twirling a knife or whatever, and someone will comment, or like, oh, hard use, whatever, like jokingly, like I'm not someone who hard uses my knives, like, oh, that's just for Instagram, whatever. I don't know anybody personally, like in real life, who uses knives harder than I do. And I would imagine a lot of the people who even watch my video, no judgment to any of you, I don't think it's, don't take this the wrong way, but I doubt many of you are actually getting out and chopping stuff with your knives on a regular basis and clearing trails. And like some of you, maybe hard using them in other ways, you might use your knives harder than I do, and that's fine. But I get a little bit, it tickles me when people are like, oh, you probably don't even hard use your knives because you just twirl them around, whatever. I do hard use my knives, and even if I didn't, it's none of your business. I don't get why people care about that per se. Like if someone wants to collect knives and never even put them in their pocket, and they just enjoy the collection aspect of it, and they've got them hoarded somewhere, more power to you. There's nothing I would rather you collect than knives, because it's what I like to. Anyways, I digress about that. Ergos, like I said, one of my top things. I think ergos, carry, and cutting are probably my top 3 things. They've got to be, because if a knife doesn't fit well in my hand, if it doesn't go okay in my pocket, and if it doesn't cut things, again, that could mean different aspects of cutting. But if it doesn't cut things, carry well, and fit well in my hand, then I'm not going to keep that knife. That's the reality of it. If my collection habits change, that might too. I might buy something that doesn't fit in my hand, doesn't even have a pocket clip, or go into my pocket and sucks at cutting. But in the meantime, I'm going to keep buying things that do those things. Fit and finish. Like I said, moving target based on value. And then, yeah, carry and cutting we just talked about. Value, I guess, goes with fit and finish, kind of. So, I don't know. I hope this makes some sense. Quick tidbit as well. Almost every video that I ever post, I shoot in one take. I don't like write out anything before. Literally, this is what I have in front of me. This is my list that I used to score some knives in the past. I just like to be candid and open and honest and free form and share my thoughts. So if you don't enjoy my rambling, then skip these videos of me talking, because it'll be way too boring for you. In fact, you're not watching at this point if you don't like this kind of stuff. But to those of you who do appreciate it, thank you. It means a lot to me to keep it genuine. It's important to me, I should say, to make sure that when I'm sharing my opinions and my thoughts about knives, gear, anything, that it's actually coming from a place of sincerity, because I don't want to be the type of channel who's just selling you stuff. I want to be the type of channel who's helping you make informed decisions if you're using it to buy stuff, or is at least entertaining in some way. And so take that for what it's worth. This is literally one take, just set the camera down. I can't even tell how long it's recording because I've got it facing me. But hopefully you appreciate that I do it this way, because I'm not going to stop doing that. I'm not going to like write down a whole list of what I need to say and go through bullet points, or I want to be a different knife or gear or whatever kind of channel I am ultimately. Obviously it's very knives, but I want to be different from what's out there already. And I think one of the ways I can do that is just by being genuinely me and talking for as long as I feel it needs to be to express what I'm trying to say. And so that's what I've done here. But hopefully this all somehow helps you better understand me and what I value in knives, the way that I like to collect knives and buy knives, and why I let go of certain knives. And I do think it's also worth saying real quick, I sell a lot of knives that I love. If I had unlimited money to spend on knives, I wouldn't sell nearly as many. I'd still let go of some if I really didn't like them, then I wouldn't have a reason to hang on to them. But I sell a ton of knives all the time that I adore, that if money was no object, I would absolutely keep on carrying regularly and enjoying forever. But it's just, in order to fuel the hobby the way I enjoy it, sometimes it relies on me selling those things to try more stuff. And every now and then there's a knife like the Wayfarer, which even though I've let go of twice now, I'm on my third one. And so some knives keep coming back to me. Got a second Arius now. So even though I let go of some knives, sometimes they come back, sometimes they don't. But that's, I think, worth saying as well. Anyway, this has been way too long, I'm sure. I have no idea how long it's been, probably, I don't know, 40 minutes, something. So I'm gonna cut it off here. And thank you all so much. Thank you to those of you who support my channel, whether it be just by watching, commenting, liking. If you follow me on Instagram, thank you as well. If you're one of my patrons on Patreon, if you've bought any of my merch, whether it be just stickers or tees or mugs, whatever it is, thank you so much. I genuinely appreciate you. And I'm always having fun doing this. So that'll be that.